Recording's in progress. Does that mean I have to behave, Nikki?
It's official.
And that would in fact be a first.
I know, right? We
I
do
love
our,
all the I love all the competing AIs, the competing note takers. This
I
is
know, it's
awesome.
like interesting how how this all kind of comes together now. Hi everyone, welcome. We're just gonna let everyone get settled in. Sometimes it's for the
See, our
transition, getting on Zoom, give
our
everyone a
class
chance
is
to get
end
here.
quite late. Just letting you know, so people might be slightly late trying to make their way to the Zoom meeting.
Is that Bajihan?
Yes, I was just saying that our class ended very late,
Okay.
so I think that some people will be late. I myself, I'm just biking my way back home.
Not a problem. We'll give everyone a chance to get here. We have until 6:30, and so I think that'll give us plenty of time to do that. But thanks for the heads up. It's good to know that that is a factor. Hi everyone, welcome. As I mentioned, we're just going to let everyone get settled in here. Good to see you all. It's kind of fun to have both fellowships together. So we have Leaders for the Future and Business Development Fellows. So I think between the two fellowships, we've got 32 fellows total. Everyone getting ready to take a little bit of a break coming up here in a few weeks, or a couple weeks, I guess. It's getting close.
Not me, Nikki. No rest for the wicked.
You're an anomaly, but we kind of
In
expect
so
it
many
now.
ways. In so many ways.
Don't disappoint us now. Oh boy,
Um,
this is super fun. Well, we have such a great panel prepared for all of you. Really excited to have these panelists back, and I won't get too much into the intros yet, just to make sure we get a chance for everyone to get here. Um, but it's going to be really fun to hear from them. And oh, welcome, Lizzie. Hi, good to see you here too.
Hi, nice to
So
see you.
yeah, so we've got a full panel. This is really great. So I guess well, about seven past the hour. There's
yeah, we should
another
start.
fellow, and we should probably get started. So I'm going to kick things off, and then we'll go from there. But welcome. My name is Nikki Peterson, and I'm the senior program manager at the Mike and Renee Child Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. We're really excited to have both Leaders for the Future fellows and the Business Development fellows here with us, as well as some really great panelists. And so I'm pretty sure everyone's familiar with Jasmine as well as Joe, but we'll have them do some short introductions, and then I'll introduce the panels, and we'll go from there. So
Great.
Jasmine,
Jasmine.
would you like to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Nikki. Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmine. I am the program manager for Leaders for the Future. Um, the fellows of the Leaders for the Future Fellowship already know who I am, but for those of you who don't know, that's me. Passing things off to Joe now.
Thanks, Jasmine. And also a proud Aggie grad. Need to
Yes.
need to make that cool because neither Nikki or I can claim that sadly. So
Definitely a proud Aggie.
yes.
Osmosis.
And I believe I know, I'm pretty sure I know everybody in this call, but I'm Joe D'Annunzio. I'm the executive director of the Institute as well as a professor at the Graduate School of Management.
Great. So I'll allow our panelists to, fully introduce themselves, but just so you know, we have Julia Kerr here. She's a business development fellow and she graduated from the fellowship in 2020, went on to get her MBA, and she'll talk a little bit about that, which is super exciting. Also, Lizzie Mojica, she's a Leaders for the Future fellow from 2021, I believe. And so she'll tell a little bit about her story. We also have Malvina Tismori. and she's a Leaders for the Future fellow from 2022. And then finally, Ripon Paul. He was the same cohort as Julia, so that's kind of fun for them to have a little reunion on this panel. And he's got a great background as well. So welcome everyone here.
Great. Thanks, Nikki. That's awesome. And thank you for organizing this and all your work you do, Nikki, to help manage the Business Development Fellows program. And Jasmine, thank you so much for all the work you do in helping manage and guide the Leaders for the Future program. Sure. Our goal tonight is really to have an informal conversation. I think we've done these panels for years and years. Pre-COVID, we used to do them in person, and they were kind of in some ways wacky because getting everybody in the same room, which is even more difficult post-COVID, was pretty hard pre-COVID. I love this virtual format. I think the one downside is questions, a little harder to see each other's faces and whatnot. What we like to do is use chat for questions. And then between Nikki, Jasmine, and myself, we'll do our best to curate those. So I'm going to take a couple minutes to start and ask each of our panelists to talk a little bit about their hero's journey, a little bit about their experience in the program, either the BDF or the LFTF program, and then a little bit about what they've done since and the connection, right? The goal here for those of you in current fellowships is to help you start thinking about what comes next, right? And each of your hero's journey is going to be different, but we can learn from those that are a little further out in their career arc. So I'll start by asking each of our four panelists to give a brief discussion about, their journey, and then I'll have one or at most two questions to kind of get things going, and then we'll turn to your questions in chat. But I do reserve the right panelist to come back and get you a zinger here and there if a good, friendly, happy, healthy zinger, like the T zinger, not the bee stinger zinger, as we go through. All right, great. So Julia, why don't we start with you? Just a couple minutes, a little bit about your experience as a business development fellow, and then sort of what's happened since, what your arc's been like.
Yeah, I was always interested in kind of the business side of science. I was in my PhD program at UC Davis when I found out about the Business Development Fellows program. And my PI actually at the time had a company and closed it. And so I kind of was working for him because I knew he had this business mindset and kind of wanted to learn that from him. And found the Business Development Fellows program, thought it was a great add-on to my PhD. And so, because I knew I wanted to move into more communication of science, supporting scientists, building, like helping scientists with the business side of science. And as Nikki said, Ripon and I were in the cohort that graduated in 2020, which meant the world was very different than we had expected. And I had the opportunity at the end of the program to apply to the MBA program. And 2020 was weird. Everyone has a different story, but I had a lot of extra time because I wasn't allowed to do research, but I was still doing my PhD. So I ended up getting my MBA on nights and weekends while I finished my PhD during the week for the last 2 years of my PhD. I don't really know how I got through it, but I don't think anyone really remembers that time in their lives. So it's like 2 years between 2020 and 2022. And right outside of grad school, I had said, okay, I'm going to go get a business development style job. And I was able to leverage my business development education in my MBA and through this fellowship to get some job offers in that area. I actually ended up going into staying in science for an extra year. I went to Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory where I was a postdoc for a year. And at the end of the year, I said, yep, you know what? Being a scientist is not what I want to do. I really want to go to the business side. But what the business development fellowship, curriculum and also my MBA curriculum helped me do was network. And when I went and talked to people, they believed me when I said, oh yeah, I can do that. Oh yeah, I can do that. And they're like, oh yeah, because you have this certificate, you know how to do business development. And I actually ended up in a role at the National Lab, stayed in the National Lab, and I am now a business development executive at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, where I do market analysis for all of the new inventions that the scientists come up with. And when they want to build a product around it or make it go into the private sector to become products for the US economy, it comes through our office and I get to evaluate it for market analysis and where we want to put it in the market. So that's pretty cool. It's basically exactly what I wanted to do, and I ended up doing it. So that's kind of my hero's journey on that.
Great, thank you, Julie. That's perfect, and really appreciate hearing that. And we'll come back to a couple of those themes for sure in a moment. Let's turn to your fellow cohort member and talk a little bit about your BDF experience and sort of what's happened since. You've had an interesting journey.
Yeah. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Julia. Yeah, actually, yes, Julia stated really well. So that was a different kind of role. Like when we finished graduation, when we finished our fellowship in 2020. Oh my God, I think we finished in June 30th, and I was already jumping into the world of COVID in the real healthcare, since my background is like a physician. So this hospital I was working before, so they wanted me to not just manage one, they wanted me to manage 2 big hospitals and 3 clinics. And we were completely taking care of the patients, like COVID patients, and how my fellowship actually helped me. Like, actually, I would say, like, I was just seeing the immediate results of my fellowship experience and what I learned there. So government was just throwing grants on us. And before that, this fellowship, I had no idea how to manage the balance sheets, how to, actually work with the numbers. So it was like an instant, application of what I learned in the fellowship. And then on the top of it, we had a class like the team development. Oh my God. So I had to be constantly hiring. And I'm not sure, because there was a also mandate, like if, a doctor or any, like what they say, para healthcare staff, if they get sick, you have to kind of give them a leave of 2 weeks and then, bring in new people. So building team was like also I learned the tricks, like, who to bring in to do what, so which probably without this fellowship, I would have had no idea, because I was just trained as a physician, and physicians are really bad at managing people, if they are just physicians. I'm not saying all of them. There are exceptional people, but I was one of them. But this fellowship, really helped me to hire people, to build teams of professionals, who are probably 15 years senior than me. I knew how to pitch and, what they had to do and, what they had to bring into the program. So I worked in that role for a couple of years, until I got exhausted, because this was pandemic and I myself got infected a couple of times. So, and I consider myself, okay, after that, I consider myself like, I'm a more like a social entrepreneur mindset. So I am more into healthcare. So when I was doing my MS prior to this fellowship at UC Davis, so my thesis was on rare diseases, because as a doctor, I can see we have number of rare diseases out there, and now we even have therapies for them. But the problem is, like, standard family care practitioners or even any provider, because we don't deal them regularly. That's why they're called rare diseases. And it is so hard for doctors to make a prompt diagnosis. So I was so interested to use technology to assist in this domain. So that was my thesis, which was really loved by my program there at the School of Medicine at UC Davis. So, but I just didn't want to, keep it in the papers. Like, I wrote it and it stayed in the papers. I just wanted it to be implemented. So during the course of time, working in different places, like, doing my standard like business development roles, but I was able to pitch in to Kaiser Permanente. So 6 months ago, so we are working on detecting rare diseases by using the technology the way I suggested. But actually, fortunately, they were also already looking, their paradigm was already shifting towards this, to use more AI and, using like all these algorithms to detect more diseases. So these days, I'm totally not a business guy, but, I'm doing prep for it. So next year we'll be like actually starting this project. So currently I am busy creating a data set. Like today, I did 50 dementia patients. Since morning, I was just like, AI was telling me, oh, based on this, it looks like this patient has dementia. But, trust me, I did 50. I only found probably 5 or 10 real dementia patients. So AI is not there yet, So I was basically kind of trying to say, yes, this patient is really a dementia patient, but this patient probably has memory issue because of hypothyroidism or maybe some other things. I don't want to go in all details of medicine. So hopefully early the next quarter of the 2026, we will start actually working even more. So I'm so excited. All in all, this fellowship, as Julia said, no, people listen to me more. I was able to pitch in. They believe in me. Yes, this is a great idea because this guy, he studied at UC Davis. And important thing, I'm, oh my God, so many things. So the mentor list you guys gave me, 300 of them during the fellowship. Trust me, I still call them and text them
That's
and ask
fantastic.
them,
Yeah.
and build some good connections with them. Even it's just like my work, or even if an idea from my friends. So you guys are really, awesome, lucky to be in this cohort. Just like, I mean, I can't be more grateful than that. Thank you. My
That's
information was a little long, but I'm
no,
excited to share.
that's great feedback, and thank you for bringing on the point about network. We'll talk about that in a moment. But
Yeah.
you're 5 years in, right, from your fellowship, and you're still building and growing and evolving that network. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, so let's turn next to Malvina. I would love to hear a little bit about your hero's journey, about your time. Not quite as long since your fellowship, but a little bit about what's happened to you and sort of connecting it to your experience as a fellow.
Absolutely. So, hello everybody. My name is Malvina, and I was the Leaders for the Future Fellow the last year of my PhD in 2021, 2022. So I joined this fellowship because I knew that I want to transition to industry from academia. So a little bit about my background. I started my academic journey in Europe. I studied veterinary medicine. But I knew that I don't like clinical practice. I like basic science. I want to study disease pathways. I want to maybe contribute in the development of new therapeutics and treat, hundreds, thousands of patients, animal and human, and not just a few in my clinical practice, right? So after I graduated vet school, I did a master's in toxicology to learn more about drug discovery and development. I worked a little bit in Denmark and in Greece, and then I moved to the United States in 2018 to pursue my PhD in pathobiology, to study more disease and cancer pathways. And then I also had a designated emphasis in translational research to learn how to connect the lab with the clinic. So by that time, I knew that I want to work in drug discovery and development. I knew that my expertise was mostly, in pathobiology, in molecular oncology, but it can also be applicable to other diseases. So by joining this fellowship, it really helped me to market myself, to package my skills in a way that industry can understand it, because each and every one of us has a unique skill set, unique experience, but we need to know how to tell our story for the job that we want to do, right? So this fellowship, first of all, helped me believe in myself that I can do the leap, develop my soft skills, learned by my cohort, and then from also the panelists that came to us back then. And then I found my industry job while I was still in my last year of the PhD in a biotech in Los Angeles. Currently, I'm the assistant director of translational medicine, and I'm leading the animal studies to move our small molecules from the very early stages to GLP and maybe phase 1 clinical studies in humans. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Malvina, and thank you for for emphasizing the importance of narrative. We'll also touch on that, obviously we spent a lot of time talking about the hero's journey, which is is your story, right? All right, Lizzie, you're about to clean up here, and you are the most recent of our fellows. It's only been, what, 3 years since you've been out. So tell us a little bit about your journey, and everybody's is unique. Yours may has a little extra unique twist
Oh,
to
is
it.
it? I don't know.
I think so.
Yeah, I don't even know the nomenclature of which fellowship year I was, but I was 21 to 22, so same as Malvina, and I'm so excited to see you, Malvina, and hear about like what's been going on with you since. But okay, so my name is Lizzie Mojica, and yeah, I was a Leaders for the Future fellow. I was doing my PhD in ecology. I think this was my 4th year, or was it my 5th year? Sorry, it was my 4th year of my PhD when I did the fellowship. I signed up for this fellowship because I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my PhD, aside from that I wanted to make an impact in fish conservation, and I wanted to use a unique skill set that I had developed in biochemical ecology in order to do that. And I didn't really know what I would get out of the fellowship. I think Malvina described it perfectly. I completely relate to her. I think that this fellowship gave me, let's see, sorry. There's so much that this did for me, and honestly, and I'll keep describing my story, but like this fellowship in particular really did change my career trajectory, and I feel like I have the best job in the world right now because of it. But it gave me the ability to see value in so many different kinds of jobs and communicate my value to get those jobs, and even like communicate the value of, you know, different ideas in each of those settings. I also want to add, and I think Ripon was talking about the networking aspect too, and I know that was a different fellowship program, but I definitely built my networking skills in the Leaders for the Future fellowship program, excuse me, and multiple of the jobs that I had after graduating, and yeah, it was quite a few jobs I've had since graduating. I've been moving around a lot, but at least 3 of those jobs did not exist, and like they came to be because of my networking. So it's really important to cultivate those networks and keep these relationships. So to quickly explain like what my journey has been since the fellowship, so I graduated with my PhD in 23, and I first decided to work for a startup company in the cellular agriculture space, which is something that I never would have even considered had I not done this fellowship. Like I wasn't really interested in business at all, but I am interested in impact, and I saw this as a great opportunity. And honestly, it just didn't end up being right for me at the time, or like long term. But I got to use biochemistry for sturgeon conservation, which is this like ancient fish, and extremely endangered. And I got to create cell lines that could be used as this never-ending supply of caviar. And from there, alongside that, I also took on a part-time postdoc position, again through networking, but like to run in parallel to this other thing that I was doing, because both of these things were important to me. And I wanted to explore like how I could continue fish conservation in different spaces. And then as I continued a postdoc, I was like, I really want to explore government work too, and do something more, what's the word I'm looking for? Like active, like rather than theoretical or building something, like do something that's happening right now that has implications for the ecosystem right now. Mm-hmm. So I was doing that then along my postdoc, but you know, something probably notable to say here too is that I was doing that at the level of a scientific aide, which is like a minimum wage job. And I feel like this fellowship gave me courage to see the value in doing that minimum wage job. And it was extremely, extremely valuable. Like for the first time, I got to learn and have hands-on experience with the native fish in California. And having that experience put me in a position where I, got to be selected then for like a really prestigious job with the state. So I'm now the senior environmental scientist supervisor for the Feather River Fish Hatchery. So I work for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. I supervise the largest state-run hatchery, and we have it's an extremely important hatchery for fish conservation as well as commercial and sport fisheries. And like even yesterday, so I'm so sorry I missed a prep call for this because I was in a technical work group. But in that, I got to pitch to environmental program managers. So like my people higher than me, I got to pitch fish epigenetics as a management tool, and that's now going to executives as an idea. And it's like, this is exactly what I wanted. And it's like honestly, I give a lot of credit to this program for like allowing me to see the value in all of these spaces. So sorry if that was a little long and rambly, but that's a bit of my story.
No, that's a fantastic story, and I think the four of you have illustrated that that you're four that there's certainly a thread that ties all four of you together, and your the colleagues that you had in your cohorts, but also the uniqueness of each of your paths, not just the areas that you've decided to focus your energy on technically and operationally, but just how you've gone about it. And I do want to emphasize for our current fellows, you each talked about a number of things, but I pulled away from you, Julia, that, knowing what you want and building the plan to go get it, from Ripon, really quite a few things, but, I particularly appreciate the invest in your network while you're a fellow and then evolve and grow and leverage it. And from Malvina, thank you for talking about telling my story, right? I think we undervalue the importance of being able to articulate who we are, what we want, why it's important. And any of you that are going to be pitching for the Big Bang or Little Bang, everything, that it's critical to be able to pitch your story about your idea, your company, your enterprise, but it's also critical to be able to do that about yourself, right? And then last, Lizzie, I particularly liked your comment about knowing your value, right? And I think what we found with a lot of grad students that we work with is you underestimate your value, right? And so I think you heard from all four of our fellows the confidence that they got in learning things outside of their area of specialty helped them to know their value. And that confidence is going to be really important in your go forward path, whatever that looks like. Okay, so I'm going to remind you, this is a freaking awesome panel, right? So please use chat to enter questions for all four of them or one of them, and I will do my best working with Nikki and Jasmine to curate. But I do want to ask one question before we get to yours and fellows, so you can go start putting them in chat now. So one of the things we talk about, and all of our current fellows are going to be making decisions sometime in the near future on the next move in their careers, right? Some of them might stay in academia. Some of them might move into government service or research outside of academics. Some may move into industry or consulting. Right? There's a lot of different paths. But I'd like to hear from each of the panelists, and maybe we'll go in reverse order. So I'm going to come right back to you in a moment, Lizzie, about the process that you use to make these kinds of decisions. And I think several of you heard me before, not the decisions of, is it a cappuccino or a latte this morning, right? These decisions that are, well, a coffee decision is admittedly important, but not that important. But these sliding door decisions, right, where in making this decision, it's going to have a profound impact on the next portion of the arc of your hero's journey. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, you can pick one decision, one particular one when you first came out or whatever you think is important. But I'd love to hear a little bit about how do you make that decision? Who's involved in it? What process? What values do you draw on? I think at a top level, just a couple minutes, but a little bit about that, because again, each of our fellows are going to have a unique set of circumstances and decisions, but all of them are going to have to go through this process. So I'm going to come right back to you, Lizzie, for your thoughts on this.
That is a wonderful question, and I'm not sure how to describe the answer to that. I'm excited to hear everyone else's takes. I mean, for me, making those decisions between steps in your career, it's been like weighing your values, like values in the workplace, not just, well, including like the content of a job, but also what the job means outside of the content. Something in my mind. So when I took this supervisor development training for the state, they had this little table, which I love so much, and I think it's available on CalHR, but it describes like all these different aspects of work, like work location and fun and high pay and independence and so on. And it's like, at this time in my career when I've been making these moves, it's not like I necessarily knew that that's what I was considering, but it's just taking all of that information into account, what's most important to you at a certain time, and what do you need to invest to get to a certain place. Or is this like where you want to end up? Is this like the long-term path for you? So I'll describe a little bit about my like first transitions. I decided to work for a startup company immediately after grad school. And it wasn't like a easy decision for me necessarily, but it was a balance of this is doing something in biochemical ecology that is going to serve fish. And that's probably number one for me. Number two, though, for me was work location. My husband got his dream job in Chico, California, which is a small town a little bit north of Davis. And it was really important to me that I found a job that would let me also let him have his job. But then it's also a balance on his end. So if things couldn't work out, like he would need to do something else too. But like this is something that was really important to me. And I mean, those were the primary reasons. And it was a really great job. I was really excited about it. And it was hard for me to leave that job. And, I don't know necessarily how much to go into it, but I decided that cons of the job overshadowed the value that I saw in being in Chico and doing this job that like had the right content. And through this fellowship, I'm coming back to this fellowship, like I had the courage to leave a bad job because I knew something else would be out there. I gained valuable experience. I can tie this into my narrative. And I did. And I knew a professor that I had TA'd for at UC Davis. And through talking to him about my situation, it created this great new opportunity to move forward in a different way. So like those were things happening for me in like what is driving these decisions.
Well, and thank you for being so candid about that, Lizzie. And I think sometimes it's hard to admit things didn't turn out the way we expected, right? I think that one of the challenges of the narratives we hear about people's careers sometimes is it's like everything was perfect. It just all went incredibly smoothly, exactly according to plan, which is a big load of malarkey for almost all of us. And so just talking about the twists and turns and the courage to address them is really important. Thank you for that, and thank you for your candor. All right, Malvina, how about a little bit from you on sort of your process, who you involve, how you make these sort of important and sliding door moment decisions?
So there are so many things again, but I would say even during my 20s, I tried to envision how my life later in life, how I wanted my life to look like. If I wanted, for example, to work nonstop or to have balance in my life, to have a family and a very successful career. And this is exactly what I wanted. I wanted to, work in drug discovery and development. I wanted to be at the forefront, of new therapeutics, but also I wanted to have a family and to have time to spend with my family. So during my studies, I would say I always focused on learning as much as I could. And during my PhD, for example, I did so many parallel projects. And actually, I got this job because of one of my parallel projects. Like I worked with a small molecule cancer xenografts. I treated the mice, I extracted the tumors, I did RNA-seq, which is exactly what they wanted me to do in this job afterwards. If I hadn't done this side project, that I had focused only on my main dissertation project, maybe I wouldn't be a good candidate. So yeah, so I would say there are two main things that I noticed that matter. One is what you know, your knowledge, your skills, and the other one is your personality and how well you can be coached and how humble you are to learn new things. And at least the first one, I really try to invest on. The second one, I learned it much later. Yeah, so this is a work in progress. Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
I don't know if I helped Joe. Yeah.
Oh, go keep going, Malvina. No, it's okay.
No, yeah. And this is it basically. Yeah, to try to envision how you want your life to look like.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think most, if not all of you, have gone through the Odyssey Plan exercise. And if you haven't, that's a big part of what that is. It's just one example of exactly that, is periodically taking a moment, right, Melvin, and being mindful. What is it that you actually want? And is the path that you're on, taking you in that direction? And if not, what do you need to correct? All right, let's turn to you, Ripan. Tell me a little bit about sort of a decision you had to make, one of these sliding door moments, and how you made it.
Thank you, Joe. I think pretty much. The decisions I make are pretty much the same way as as Lizzie and Malvina, and they stated. By the way, Lizzie, I worked at Oroville for 12 years, next to Chico in the Oroville Hospital. So I was actually working full time, at Oroville when I was doing my fellowship. So I sometimes used to drive. The hospital was like really accommodating, and I used to drive, I remember, at 2 o'clock, from Oroville to UC to attend classes. Full time, sometime in the rain. But it was fun. So anyway, I think, the fellowship, after fellowship, I can say like how it changed my decision-making for my personal life or where I want to be. So in fellowship, it was not just, trained to us to make connections with people who are like basically, okay, I can just say it this way. So before that, I would probably end up like, making friends with the physicians or the people with my background only. And I will probably limit myself to the knowledge because our jokes, our ideas, they'll all be around the same domain. So then, I started making friends with like MBA students, at the fellowship. And then, that kind of like, really kind of expanded my kind of like, okay, how that like the connection circle, like I would like reach out to the people who are not just doctors or engineers, let's say, maybe just like people who are like anthropologists, or maybe sociologists, and this, so when it comes to make my decisions, like based on that, so I honestly, like currently, like the job I started, it is actually in Bay Area, and I'm lucky, I'm working, at home, still here in this area. So I was introduced by someone with a completely non-medical background to do this, So he was an engineer, they were saying, oh yeah, we are, the hospital is trying to, do this program. But like, what I'm just trying to say, so my decision-making was basically based on, okay, well, I want to work with the people who are different than me, who are smarter, who knows more than me from different domains. So that, maybe because, I don't consider myself old, I'm still younger. I may end up like, kind of creating a like, big like unicorn, startup sooner or later. If I just, I'll be there, they're complimenting me and I'm complimenting them. So when I make my decision, I like to, this is my new approach, post-fellowship. Just, try to see who you are working with and what are their backgrounds. Are they just too similar to you, or they are bringing in something else to the table? So this is how I make a decision, even in my personal friendships, So now it's just like funny, even if my son's a high school student, friend, I ask him, do you have an idea? Do you have an idea you want me to kind of like, I want to be friends with them. So this is kind of like my approach to meet people or to work where, you meet people with the different backgrounds, where you can have even like, like a fun conversation, that can bring an idea out of it, even on a cup of coffee. So this is kind of like my approach. Thank
I
you.
love it.
Yeah,
That's
that's my.
that's fantastic, and I love the it reminds me of the Whitman quote, "Be curious, not judgmental," right? That you can learn things from your child's high school friends. Absolutely.
Yes.
Awesome. All right, Julia, you're anchoring this leg, and I know a little bit about some of the decisions you've made over the last few years, but maybe pick one and talk a little bit about, who you took counsel in and just, how you made that decision. Because again, the fellows that are going through the program now are going to be facing the same challenges you faced.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I had to pick just one. Okay. Um, I had a whole narrative, Joe. No.
Well,
I'll talk
you know what,
about.
Julia, you get to do whatever you want. How's that?
I'll talk a little bit about a couple of the career decisions I made, just because they have similar thought processes with them. Um, when I was interviewing about leaving grad school and starting to interview, a big thing for me was looking at how the people who were interviewing me and I got along. And I asked them, like, hey, what does your life look like? Are there people at work on Saturday? Do people leave at 5 or do people leave at 8? And I was just pretty candid because and people will tell you, oh, yeah, like when work needs to get done, we're here on Saturdays, but most Saturdays people like have kids and they're at soccer games, or they're like, you know what? Yeah, like people stay late when work needs to get done. And you can kind of tell, like, oh, okay, that's a lot of hours. And I had to assess, hey, is that a company I want to pursue with? And when I was thinking about going to work at Lawrence Livermore, I was interviewing somewhere else as well. And one of the things someone candidly said to me in an interview was, oh yeah, it's really great working here for the first 6 months. And then someone's going to yell at you, or someone's going to yell at someone in a meeting. And like, maybe you'll get a little disillusioned. And I was like, we're done. Like, I don't need any more interviews from your company. Thank you so much. So definitely those things were part of kind of my decision making, and they are very obvious examples of why I chose not to work at those places, because for me, the people I work with is really important to me. And Nikki and Joe know some of the people I work with and how wonderful they are. So I'm very lucky where I currently work. And I think Joe was alluding to my very last career change into this particular position. I actually called Joe and I said, Joe, I need your opinion. Like, I've worked at Livermore for a while and I'm thinking about changing to biz dev in Livermore, but like, should I stay in Livermore? Should I go to I was thinking about maybe like transitioning more into industry business development. And Joe and I had a conversation about it. And we talked about, what my goals were career wise and where I wanted to go. And it was wonderful. We just like chatted. It wasn't anything serious. It was just on the phone. I think Joe was driving somewhere. I just really felt like I had a kind of just like a zinger in my pocket. I was like, oh, look at it. Like my friend Joe and I were just chatting. Like, let's forget the fact that he's got like so much experience and I'm so lucky to have him on my side. I just really felt like, and Joe was just there, like asking the questions and like getting me to think through, what did I want my next step to look like? And so those are the two things, is really going to people who have been mentors to me and been there and presented themselves as mentors and have functioned as mentors. So like talking to Joe, and also kind of like looking at the people who are in the room during the interviews and saying, hey, like, do I want to work with them every single day? Do I want to hang out with them every single day? Or am I getting a weird vibe? And like, I kind of hope I only see that person like once in a meeting once a month. So.
That's great. Thank you for that, Julian. Thank you all four of you for that. And I think, there's quite a few themes to take away from that, but, I think it begins and ends with the something that I think is highly uncontroversial, but yet I think we often forget, which is you deserve to be happy. You deserve to have a career that is going to fulfill you in the ways that are important to you, that are different from mine or anybody else's, right? But I think it starts with this recognition, you deserve that, right? And it's worth then the investment in building the network and understanding the environment and recognizing sometimes, the first step you take is not going to be the right one, and evolve it, right? But that, ultimate recognition that you can have the confidence and the underlying belief that you deserve to be in an environment and in a place where you're going to have the impact that you want to have in the world, and yes, be happy. So, thank you, panelists, for that. That was a great introduction to this. We're going to turn now to questions. So, as a reminder, please drop them in the chat. And I'll do my best to moderate this, and Nikki and Jasmine will electronically zap me if I get out of line. I see two I'd like to start with that are, I think, really good ones. They're a little tactical, but I think they're important because sometimes tactics are important. And I'm going to combine them. And I'd love if each of the panelists are willing and feel like they'd like to answer it. Certainly, you don't have to. So from Chile, we had the question around how do you communicate about your fellowship, whether it's on your resume or when you're talking to them, and what do you describe and how to use it? And then I'm going to pair it with the question, so how do you apply for a position that you maybe don't necessarily have the qualifications before? Whether those two should be connected or not, I'm connecting them because I think sometimes part of what we've heard over the years, Nikki and I and Jasmine now, as she's in our program, from our fellows is, yeah, I had the scientific background, the technical background, the business development fellowship gave me a little 007 sort of license to say I understand the business world enough, but maybe I don't really. So, how do you communicate about your fellowship, and how do you sort of position yourself for something you're not 100% sure you're qualified for, but you've got that confidence to go after it? So who'd like to start? Or do you want me to cold call?
I have a short answer. I just do it. Anytime I've ever applied for a job, if I'm not qualified, I kind of just like, okay, it sounds cool. I think I could probably do it. Like, I've been through the business development fellow program. I've like figured out business strategies. Like, either they'll decide or not. And I mean, maybe that's not the right move, but I had no experience for my current job and I just applied for the job cold. There were other factors that helped me get the job, but whether or not that's winning advice or not, it's the advice that I go by.
No, that's fine. And Julia, before we leave you to go to another panelist, anything about how in the past you've communicated the fellowship, how you've done the one-liner or how you've included it in a CV or in LinkedIn or anything like that?
Oh, absolutely. This is an easy question because I feel like I do it all the time. My favorite way to communicate the value of the business development program is, I don't know which classes you've taken, but one of the classes that I took that I loved is we had two classes that were both like build out a business model, right? Part of that is customer discovery. You do market analysis, you figure out a product, you're talking to people. I don't know how many of those projects you guys have done, but I just focus on the projects the classes had us do because they were real world projects, and maybe they had an element, where it's small, like little bang, big bang, where you're talking about actual science. Maybe some of them were just cases, but you did the work anyway. And so whenever I talk about it, I say, yeah, I know how to do customer discovery. I did customer discovery on a probiotic mixture for dairy calves, and I figured out what the total addressable market was. I made a business plan for it. I talked to farmers, which I did. I called up farmers and was like, hey, like, you guys have meat cows and dairy cows, and how much does, this particular disease affect your dairy cows? I mean, this was one of my cohort mates' technology that they were doing for their PhD. So I just talked about what I actually did. Mm-hmm. I have the business development certificate on my resume, but when I get in a room talking to somebody, I'll say that. Or sometimes, depending on the job that I've applied for, I'll like write in there like business consulting experience, and I'll like write the projects I've done if I've done them recently, right? You guys are coming out of school. When I was coming out of school, I did that because it's real work that you did.
Great, thanks. Others like to share? Love to hear from one of our Leaders for the Future fellows.
Yes, I could go next. I would say that you don't need to fulfill 100% of the criteria to apply for a job. I read somewhere that you need to know about maybe 50-60% of what they want, and show them that, okay, this is what I bring to the table, and this is what I would like to learn. And I would say that if you know everything that you will do at this job, you will outgrow it very fast, and you might get bored and you might want to leave. So the important thing is to show them that you want to learn what you don't know, and you have stuff to contribute outside of that in their team.
Great. Thank you, Malvina. Any other feedback?
Yeah, I can say, Joe, a thing too,
Yeah, please.
So, okay, so I think, I don't know how many of you guys have a healthcare background, but, in healthcare, it helped me a lot. The fellowship, obviously, like my basic background in medicine, kind of like sometimes, what they call outperform than the, other kind of degrees I have. But once I mentioned, like, I studied at Institute of Innovation, the innovation word itself in healthcare. So it definitely kind of like, makes me like, shine out of many other candidates. And then when I talk about, yes, as Julia mentioned, so we had 5 classes, so we are not sure what kind of classes now are in the program. So the management of innovation, new product development was, trained to us. Entrepreneurship clinic was trained to us. So, and basically we can definitely, translate that into the, let's say there is a job and you're feeling like, okay, well, I may not be qualified for this, but you can certainly kind of translate that into resume somehow, synthesize it, like, okay, well, this is what I learned, and this is how I can transfer that skill to my current, even because when we, as I just said, like, I was a business development director for 2 years, right after the fellowship. And there were some times when we need someone, but we don't know what title we should be giving them. We knew what we want them to do, but it's always a kind of like, we don't want to give a title that kind of undermines the person's qualification, but we also don't want to, give them a title that is totally outweighing the current market, like maybe the salary ranges and all. So in my experience, or like in my suggestion, just apply. And if you have learned, because we have enough classes like in the fellowship programs that prepares you to really transfer those skills to, I believe, any field. Obviously, I'm not aware of all other fields, but at least in the healthcare, the sciences. So that's how I, use in my resume. So the first thing in my resume, even before my medicine degree or my MS degree, I write my fellowship, like what I learned. So this is kind of my approach, and honestly, it had worked for me, and I believe it should work for most of you. So yeah, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Rupan. Appreciate it. Liz, before we move off this, anything else you'd like to add?
I agree with what everyone has said on this. So with the like, should you apply or not if you don't have that experience? I'm also in the camp of like, no, apply. I remember I heard something when I was in undergrad, and I don't know if this is true, but it was something along the lines of like, oh, women will apply to jobs if they have 100% of the qualifications, but
Yes.
men do if it's like 60%. And I'm like,
I think
no,
it's
I'm
more
gonna.
like 30% for men. Sorry, not to be.
What?
Yeah, the research it's below 50. Yeah.
That's insane to me. Okay, so apply, especially to any women out there. Like, please apply. And something else that I wanted to add on with that is, I like, in situations like this, I think the key is like, highlight your strengths, and you don't really need to address weaknesses. Like, it's there in your resume or it's not. And something that I've learned, and you kind of have to get a feel for it depending on what positions you're applying to, but like the way that you package your experience will differ. So like, in my experience, I was much more brief with how I described things when, talking with the CEO of a startup company, or the professor, or like more standard, or I don't know if standard is the right way. It like what I considered to be more normal positions, I was more broad with how I was presenting my information, and that worked. When I was transitioning to the state, I realized like me saying that, like, oh, I was the founding scientist of this company doing cellular agriculture, they had no idea what that meant. And so like I wasn't getting like credit for the things that I was doing. And so I realized, and you really have to do this when applying to a state job or a federal job, is like really explain what you're doing. In that setting, you have so many forms in your application, but like it must have been 12 pages of like essays of descriptions of like physical tasks you did in a job. Like even with my minimum wage job as a scientific aide, like I described like all the steps that I was doing, and that really carried a lot of weight in me then getting my position for the state now. So yeah, just explaining your experience differently depending on the group that you're going with.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's great. Thank you. Thank all for it. And so we've got some great questions in the chat. Please, we'll have time. So if you've got a question, drop it in. But your response, Lizzie, is a great segue into the question from Calissa around advice that you have for securing interviews, whether they're for internships or jobs. Do you lean on your network? Do you, what is it that that you've done to help advance your opportunities to get interviews? So, Lizzie, maybe we'll go right to you since you just finished your warm.
That sounds good. And yeah, it depends on the kind of job. Let me think about this for just a second. So for securing securing interviews.
And there's no one right answer, right? I mean, and for each year it's going to be different and in different times and in different arcs. Entry level job might be different than, 10, 15 years from now, but a little bit about your experience and, because again, being empathetic for our current fellows, right? It's like they're starting to grapple with, this portion of my academic career is starting to come to an end. How do I start thinking about preparing myself for what comes next?
Yeah, I think networking is key to getting interviewed. I mean, it's one of the most important things. I think you could get to a point where you're interviewing without having a strong network, but like even as I was just describing, like, oh, you have to do all of these things in your application to get an interview with a state job, which is true. I only knew that because of my network. Like these were the people then telling me that like, oh no, this is why your applications weren't getting through. And yeah, so one statistic was I, as a graduate student, or like right in my last year before I met the CEO for this startup company, I really wanted to work for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, so a federal job. And I think I applied to like 44 positions and I didn't get a single interview. And like now I know exactly why that was. And I had been following what I was taught with how to write my resume, write my cover letter and everything, but like it wasn't right for that setting. And so I think that networking is extremely important, like trying to like find those connections with people in the spaces where you want to be. And they'll mentor you to help you get to the place where you're getting interviews. So I think that's my advice on that one. Network to the extent that you can, but like not in a strange way either. Like be yourself and then like naturally form these connections with people.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Lizzie. That's very helpful. And again, I know this may feel a little tactical, but these are the insights from your actual experiences that are really, really helpful for our fellows. Other thoughts from our panelists?
I can add on to Lizzie's comment.
Yeah, please.
I just want to endorse her the networking part. So my current Kaiser job, despite I was qualified, so I just was counting in my head. It was the fifth, so I talked to someone, I need to do this, and then they talk to the next one. So the fifth person was the person who got me this interview. So there were like 4 people in the chain. 3 of them I never knew. I didn't know them. So networking is so important. So you have to bring yourself out. Don't be shy. Just tell like, okay, look, okay, well, I'm looking to do this. This is my passion is. So seriously, I just counted like it was the 5th person, who supposedly is my director now. So there were like, 4 people like in the chain, when I consider myself to there. So there were like, 4 people intervened to, get me this role. So yes, networking is very, very important. I can endorse that.
Great, thanks. Julia, Malvina, thoughts?
I completely agree. And actually, even the job that I have now, like I had a mentor in the past, like 8 years ago, and he told me about the CEO of the company that even 2 years before I looked for the company, like, oh, keep this person in mind, he wants to make a company. And then when I was ready, I approached him in LinkedIn and I said, hey, this is my CV. This is what I want to do. And then he's like, oh, we have a position that really matches that. Come for an interview. And then another instance was somebody from my LinkedIn network that texted me that they have a position that he thought matched my CV. Back then I was still a student, so I couldn't apply. And then last year he also contacted me. He's in another company. Like, we do have another position that might match your CV. So something clicked to him. I don't know, even though we've never met in person. So another catchy phrase that I've heard is, it doesn't really matter who you know, it matters who knows you and your abilities and what you can offer.
Yeah.
As a personality and as skills, of course. Yeah.
Great, thank you for that, Malvina. Julia, any wrap-up thoughts on this?
Very similar. I remember getting interviews because I talked to people in the MBA students in my business development fellows classes. I got interviews from people who I met through, like, maybe not anyone directly in my cohort of business development fellows, but I got a number of interviews from just different people I met because I was in the fellowships through different social things, kept running into them, whatever. And one of them was like, oh, I have a friend down in San Diego who has started this new company. Like, I'll tell him that you're interested in a job. And I got an interview that way. I got my job at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, the first job I had at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, because I put open to work on my LinkedIn, and my friend emailed me and was like, hey, we worked together in grad school. We have a job for someone with your skill set. Like, will you please apply? So just, very much networking. And and even within the national, even at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, a lot of people change careers while staying at the laboratory. And I've been to lots of different career development seminars at the lab, and it's all, go talk to other people at the lab. There are 8,000 people here. All of them do a different job. And the more people you talk to, the more varied your career will be. So even at the laboratory, that's how we do it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Thank all 4 of you. And I think that brings up another point that, you all heard me say in the Entrepreneurship Academy, but I want to emphasize it here. Not all of us are lean-in type folks, right? Where we're going to naturally gravitate to the career development things and the networking and the cricket match and the whatever, right? To engage with people. But it is important to do it, right? And for those of you where you're a little more kind of lean back, right? Start thinking about, how do you get your toe in the water, right? How do you move forward a little? Because it is going to be important in your career development. Not everybody's going to have the same level of comfort or the same level of enthusiasm, but you can find ways and approaches that make you progressively more comfortable to do it. And so I do think that's another important lesson building on that. Okay, we've still got a couple minutes left. I want to make sure I leave my panelists each with a moment for a final question. So be prepared. I promised you a zinger, so I will give you a zinger. Wait a minute, this is being recorded and transcribed. I can't give them a real zinger. It'll have to be like yeah. All right. Anyway, so from Christina, all these questions are great, and we may have time for a couple of the specific ones to the individual panels. But I want to go to Christina's question. So it seems like you all had a pretty clear role for what you wanted, and then you went out and got it, right? I think particularly coming out of your degree programs, but just in general. So how do you narrow that down, right? You all have very strong backgrounds. You had a lot of experiences. There were a lot of options available to you. How did you narrow it down to that path? And the answer might be you didn't, right? And there was some serendipity, and that's fine too. Those are important things. So don't fit your narrative to a particular particular path. But how did that happen for you? So maybe Malvina, maybe we'll start with you.
That's a very interesting question because I was going in circles for years, especially while you're in one degree and you see what are the options afterwards, like what is your next step, shall you work, shall you pursue another degree, in what? It really, some of my choices were circumstantial, for example, like what kind of master can I afford? So pursue one of them that I really like. And then, you have your mentors that you meet there, and then they give you some directions. And then you go to the next step and you meet somebody else. And then, so don't feel bad for not having an exact plan in your mind right now. Oh, another thing also. When I started this job, I was really fixated on working in a lab. I love techniques, molecular biology, animal work, everything. But as the years go by, I see that I don't want to do that anymore. So, I want to do more, supervisory roles, maybe toward regulatory toxicology and not that much, So what I want to say is that life will take you also. It's good to be open to opportunities, talk to people, really talk to people about their lives, about their jobs, and you might choose a career that you don't like. It's okay. You can then switch to something else. So yeah, you don't have to be so strict with yourselves. Yeah,
Great.
it's hard. Honestly, it's hard.
It is, but rewarding when you make a decision, right? And you give it a go because, as we know, uncertainty creates, chaos, and it creates difficulty, right? And figuring out and making that step forward sometimes is, even if it is potentially a misstep, is the right thing to do. So Julia, how about you? How do you, seems like it was just easy peasy for you, right? You just snapped your fingers and it all came into place.
Oh, when you look back, it looks like that, huh? What you don't understand is like
Yeah.
the panic that happened on certain steps along the way.
Yeah.
I mean, I got into science because I was interested in it and good at it. And I saw opportunities I kind of saw how much I enjoyed talking with people and communicating science and how some of my colleagues were not as excited about it. And I thought, okay, maybe there's a gap there. But that happened when I was in undergrad. And it was like a decade before I was able to do anything about it, right? Or I ever like circled back to it. So I have this story of always wanting to do it. Okay, yeah, well, it took me a decade to get there. So and I wasn't certain I was going to get there, right? I left grad school and I went to a postdoc. I had said I'm not doing any science after grad school. Science was fun. Now I'm ready for my business journey, and then I went right into academia. So it's hard to figure out where you're going to go next. And I definitely want to echo what Malvina said, whereas try the job, and if you don't like it, you can always change. I know sometimes I kind of think, well, I spent 6 years studying chemistry. What am I doing not being a chemist? Right. I did 10 years of chemistry research. Now, really? But no, it's fine. I did that. I had a great time doing that. And I'm happy that I'm changing. One of the things that I think has been interesting in the way that I can think about things coming together is I always had kind of side passions. Like I always enjoyed science communication. So I made sure that, I took some time in grad school to do science communication. And different science communication projects or whatever. I was interested in business, so I did this. And so it all kind of came together because I pursued my side interests along with what I was mainly doing. So basically have hobbies, intellectual hobbies, as well as like real hobbies, because you never know how they're going to come together, right? So yeah.
Great. Thank you, Julia. Ripon, how about you? As again, it just went like that, right? Snap, easy peasy, the whole thing was laid out. Or maybe not. So how did you narrow down the many options that you had, along the way?
Thank you, Joe. And you stated, I'm just my polished version of like in a past 5 years struggle today. So we had our time. So basically, when I graduated, so we were in the peak of pandemic, and obviously we needed people. So that's why this happened, like in a snap of a finger. Because basically we needed everyone, who can come and take care of the patients. So, well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, probably speaking fourth or fifth time today, so I'm still talking about the connections. So when I narrow it down, so when I speak with my connections, I already try to ask them, like, okay, what kind of a job is this, So my happiness and my, mental peace is also very important to me, So, and then this is first thing, I want to ask, like, okay, what I'm gonna go do and who I'm gonna work with. And then, I know this kind of like gonna sound like a little what they call cliche, but I also want to work for my new project if I'm earning more money than what I was making before. So this is kind of like my thing. I don't want to like go like, okay, well, this is also my thing because we are so accomplished, we deserve it. We need to kind of like earn, like as you mentioned, we need to recognize our value. So what we are bringing in table, so we need to be compensated better. So this is kind of like another thing. And also I have some life mentors, other than obviously I have some in the fellowship, but I also have like some senior doctors who are like in kind of father figures to me. What was their trajectory? I just call them, hey, so this is what is happening. So I'm just thinking, this is my goal in next few years. I want to accomplish this in my personal life. So you think, so I just want to get their input on that. And also I try to titrate my decision, as Malvina mentioned and my other peers, like how it works with your social and personal family life. So it is difficult at times. I also had what they call second guessed my decision, like if it's the right one or not, but you will never find it until you try it. So far, I mean, I worked for business development director, which I mentioned, during pandemic. I gave my 110% because I really care for patients, but I didn't like it, to be honest. I just changed it, and I just picked up like a new role, which I'm very happy. So you just give it a try. Nobody's kind of like holding you there forever. So if you don't like it, just learn from it what you did there, and then move on to the next one. So this is kind of like yeah, there is no foolproof way in my kind of what they call algorithms as well. But yeah, this is how I do. Thank you.
Great, fun. All right, so we're going to turn last to you on this question, Lizzie.
So a few things came to mind as people were talking on this one. Things I completely forgot that I did in this fellowship program, but I started, I think this was an activity of the program, but I started a spreadsheet and I had a folder, a Google folder for this on what jobs are available. So I'd follow job boards, and when one seemed perfect, I'd put it in this spreadsheet, and it gave me a sense of like what things are out there. And something that kind of surprised me through that process was that like there's not one perfect job. I found many very different jobs that I was like, this would be perfect. And this was in my, I'm pretty sure it was my fourth year of my PhD. So like ones that I couldn't apply for, it's like, oh no, well that will never be offered again. But it's like things open up. And I think Malvina was touching on this, just like keep an open mind as you're going through your path, and as you do get an opportunity that seems great or perfect to you, go for it, try it. But also like that experience that you have will shape you also. It's gonna like continue to build your narrative or who you are and what you have to offer the world. So it's not like you necessarily missed an opportunity earlier if you decide to change course. It's just like now you're a new person too, or like, you've grown as a person and you can take a next step in a different way. So that's what I have to say on that. I think know that there's so much out there, and like there are a lot of very different things out there, and not one thing needs to be the only thing for you.
Great. Thank you for that, Lizzie. And thank you all for those responses. Okay, so we're almost at time. I promised a bit of a zinger at the end, and I'm going to give Julie a fair warning that I'm going to start with her. So I think a lot of times we think about this process of making a decision and and making change, right? Change can be very stressful. Sometimes it can be very energizing and all the things, right? But particular for many of our fellows, you've been in an academic pursuit for a long time. For some of you, since you were like 3. and and right, it's been the core focus of your journey to this date, right? And thinking about a transition into government service or industry or startup or whatever, that can create some stress, and sometimes a lot. Combination of leaving something you're known and comfortable for the unknown, and just not knowing the consequences. And I think a lot of what you heard from our panelists tonight is it's going to be okay, right? You're going to find your way. It's going to require you to invest in knowing what's important to you and going after it and building your network and putting yourself out there and, being in an environment with diverse perspectives, and then recognizing your first or second or third choice, may require you to make adjustments. So I think those are all important. But what I'd like to ask each of our panelists, starting with Julia, to do is that's all fine, acknowledging the stress and the challenges and fine, but we're going to end on an upbeat note. And what I'd like each of you to think about is, since your fellowship ended, share something about happiness, something that has given you pure joy and happiness since you were a fellow. And you don't have to edit yourself in terms of, all right, well, PG-13 or below, but you don't have to edit yourself in terms of this, directly related to the fellowship or your career or whatever, like something that just says, once our fellows get on the other side of this, there is joy and happiness and excitement and things, and all of the challenge and hard work and everything is worth it. So a moment of happiness for you, Julia, however you define that.
Oh my gosh. So not totally related to, I have 2. I'm sorry, I'm going to cheat.
You can do 2. That's fine.
Just
you though, just you. None of the rest of you try that.
In my first job at Lawrence Livermore as a postdoc, and I got to do work travel, which I a lot of like a good amount of work travel, more so than just going to a conference like I did in grad school. And I actually was sent a number of times to Colorado, and I just fell in love with the state of Colorado. And I went all over. I went to like Colorado Springs and Denver and Boulder for work, and just like falling in love with Colorado and how amazing the mountains are, and just getting the experience of going there. And weirdly, I went to undergrad in Ohio. All these people from my undergrad had moved to Colorado, so I got like one trip when I was there for work. I saw more people from my undergrad than I'd ever seen since undergrad, and that was like a lot of joy. Just that I got to go to places that I'd never really been to Colorado before. I kind of didn't think the state had anything good about it, and I just like falling in love with that. And 2, my current job. One of my favorite things that I say about my current job is I get to laugh every single day at work. And so that is, I think that's like pretty big when it comes to happiness. So yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, Julia, for being so candid about that. I appreciate it. All right, Malvina, how about you? Moment of pure happiness since your fellowship. Or 2. We'll let you have 2 too, since we let Julia have 2.
Trying to think. One of the things that comes to mind is the financial freedom that living academia gives you. Because, years and years in academia, you're either not paid or very underpaid. And
every fellow that I can see on the screen has got that knowing look about them.
You have 3, 4, 5 housemates to survive. And then when you have a better salary, maybe you don't have to do that, and you're like, I have my own place now. So nice. So this is definitely a thing. And then in the actual job, I guess getting to a point that your scientific opinion matters, and then you participate in meetings, and you help things move forward. This is something that I really enjoy.
Okay, great. Yeah, being part of something and moving projects and initiatives forward in a concrete way, and not having 9 roommates. Got it.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, Ripan, how about you? What's 1 or 2 moments of pure happiness for you since your fellowship?
Sure. Yeah, I think I have several, but I'll just maybe tell at least 2. So the one was like we had so since I graduated from medical school back in India, so my undergrad was there. So we had a silver jubilee reunion in 2023. So we were 150 students in our cohort, and most of them are, scattered across the globe. And we decided to all meet in the med school there, just like, relive, a whole weekend there as we were like 18-year-old when we started. It was fun, parties, met like, some friends, like, I actually visited India after 14 and a half year itself. So it was like a 10 days trip, but, meeting all my cohort mates, my friends, it was the most joyous, moment that I will probably never forget in our life. And we are deciding to do it 50 years in anniversary to it, in like next probably 22 years, so with
Yeah.
our grandchildren at that time, hopefully. So here, okay, so I am also very grateful. So my favorite part is obviously my job, but the part I really love the most, so we have a 1 hour Monday morning, kind of like a catch-up meetings where we don't talk anything clinical, where we just like, and I have some colleagues, they also had uh, their undergrad degrees from different parts of the planet, so like, Middle East, Africa, Asia, just like, learning from their experiences when they were like, studying medicine or just like some fun parts. So that's the best thing that happens. I always wait for the Monday mornings. So that's a pure joy to me, and then we can sip a cup of coffee and, just like, listen to each other. And sometimes we share like a small video, from our cultures, and
Yeah.
we just have a philosophical, kind of like conversations on it. So that's the best part. That's a pure happiness for me. Two things, yeah.
That's great. Yeah, and being part of a community, being with colleagues, and it's not just about the work, right? It's about shared experiences and perspectives, and yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. All right, Lizzie, you have the honor of the last moment or two of happiness, something that has been pure joy for you since you left your fellowship.
So one that came to mind is something I got to do at my job in May. Uh, so I supervise the Feather River Fish Hatchery, and we work with spring run Chinook salmon, which is a threatened species. And these are big fish. You can't even see it. But yeah, this is the size of an adult fish typically. And they're gorgeous when they come in the spring. These are fish they come into so they live out in the ocean, right? And they come into the river. If they're spring run, they come in the spring, and then they stay in the river over the summer and spawn in the fall. So this is May, so this is springtime, and we operate the hatchery in a specific way during this time. There was a reintroduction program going on where for the first time since 1942, we put the spring run Chinook salmon into the North Yuba River. I don't know if you all know where that is. Okay. And it was so wonderful. So I got to work with the program lead for this reintroduction program at the Feather River Fish Hatchery, which is where we were collecting these fish. When they come in, though, they're so silvery, like they haven't been holding in the river all summer where they do decay because it's the end of their life cycle. But these are these gorgeous, massive fish that we care so much about. And I was helping this program tagging them as needed, getting them transported. I also got to, because it's really hard to tell the sex of a fish at that stage in their development because they haven't sexually matured yet. They're about to. But I worked with tilapia in my PhD, and there's a method that did apply to Chinook salmon in a way that is not common to use as a sexing method for that species. And I got to help this program, like, okay, this should work. And we were trying to get like an even sex ratio of the fish we were picking out to transport. And then they got transported, and they got this like underwater footage of these beautiful fish going into this like much colder system which they lived in historically, and it was magical, and that was pure happiness for me.
Wow. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that moment, Lizzie. That was really powerful. And thank you. Let's give a huge round of applause to our four panelists. We are so grateful for you taking the time and the energy and being candid with us and sharing your experiences for our current fellows, whom we are so proud of and so thrilled to have in the Business Development Fellows Program and the Leaders for the Futures program. Before we wrap up, I want to turn to Nikki and to Jasmine. Are there any messages or anything that are important for our business development fellows and our Leaders for the Future fellows to hear?
Jasmine, I'll start with you if you'd like, if there's anything for the Leaders for the Future to know.
No major announcements. There have been a couple assignments that have been posted, but I thank you all for showing up. And I hope that you all got a lot of this panel, and I'm very grateful for all of the panelists.
And my sentiments are pretty much the same. I think, I communicate really regularly, so you all know your assignments, but I really just want to say thank you for being here. The panelists were amazing. And as we go into this next, kind of a break of a season, I just really wish you all just a nice, relaxing time. And good to see you all tonight.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you again, panelists. Fellows, current fellows, you will soon be part of a very powerful alumni network of Leaders for the Future and Business Development Fellows, but you still have 2 more quarters to go before you get there. So enjoy, hopefully, a little bit of rest and downtime in the coming weeks as the year ends, and celebrate as you see fit. And I look forward to seeing everyone in the new year. And Malvina, Lizzie, Rippon, Julia, thank you so much. We're really so glad. It's always heartwarming to have our fellows come back, and especially when you give back to our current fellows. All right, everyone, have a great night.
Can I just want to invite everybody who's in Davis to Woodstock's Pizza